Hi, everyone. I am really excited to introduce a fantastically interesting guest today. We've got Ted Blosser. He is the CEO of WorkRamp, the L&D platform of the future. And I have to admit that I have a vested interest in this one. Instant Impact are a very happy client of WorkRamp. Ted and I have not discussed the discount that we're going to get off the back of this podcast going viral, but we'll see what happens happens at the end. Ted, I wonder if, well, first of all, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Felix. Excited to be here. Thanks for being a customer and for that free advertisement.
Oh, absolutely, a valued customer, I should add. And Ted, I wonder if you could start, just for listeners who haven't heard of WorkRamp. Tell us what you guys do. Tell us what you're doing in the world of L&D and the dent you're looking to make.
For sure. And you almost got that spot on. I like to say for people who know the LMS category, we're a next generation LMS. We're building what we call the learning cloud. We do really two things. We have the employee learning cloud, which really enables and upskills your employees. And then the customer learning cloud, which is all about enabling your customers and partners through education. So we're excited to make a dent in the learning universe and doing our part there to help customers be more successful when it comes to their learning journeys.
And well, audience here is mostly HR professionals. I think a lot of us are dealing with disruption and changes coming really across all of the different areas and functions of the business that we support. Could you just give us a bird's eye view of what you see happening in the L&D space, how AI is impacting it, and I suppose what kind of environment HR leaders should be aware of before they think about what they're doing with L&D internally?
Oh man, that's such a good question. I think there's two big trends we're seeing right now. The second one I'll talk about is AI, so we'll go through that in a second. But the first one I'll talk about as more of like a precursor to it is that one big trend, especially in this market, is consolidation of not just the tech stack itself on the L&D side, but also in terms of the various functions within an organization that touch learning. And so I like to personally call this the Learning Center of Excellence. I was just talking, we had a customer come on to our all hands yesterday, and she gave a really good talk where they have done a great job where they pulled in partner education, customer education, sales enablement, L&D, all under one roof, compliance as well. So all these different use cases under one roof. And what we're noticing in terms of a major trend is having L&D lead those initiatives and essentially dotted line out to all or create a dotted line out to all the different parts of an organization. And that's where WorkRamp does come in, is once you get there philosophically, we think that's a major trend happening, is that L&D could be the change agents for learning culture within companies and helping them consolidate those learning cultures. Then you think about consolidating your tech stack. And so that really simplifies things and helps you drive that culture. I think there's a stat that in about 2 years ago, I think there's about 30,000 plus enterprise SaaS applications. And for sure that number is going to come down in terms of consolidation over time. That's just so wieldy for customers in terms of the main winners for customers to be able to really manage. And so we see this learning center of excellence being created, and then that learning center of excellence being created, we want to help drive that through the right technical architecture. So that's kind of trend number one we're seeing on the L&D side. And what's really great is that helps elevate L&D's position within companies, because they not only drive upskilling, but they also drive departmental impact and outcomes.
So Ted, thanks.
Yes.
Before we move on to the next trend, let's just zoom into this one.
Yes.
A little bit. I'm, as a non-L&D professional, I'm not sure I fully understood what you said. So could you bring it to life for me and just give me an example of, I don't know, if you're manufacturing fighter jets, what does that mean? How would that, what you just said, how would that work in my fighter jet business?
Ooh, that's a great analogy. I was thinking of fighter jets. What would be your core components? You have a large manufacturing team. You probably have a large engineering team. You have supply chain teams. So you probably have a support team that's helping your customers once you deliver those fighter jets. I'm sure it's not as simple as that. But think about in the traditional LMS world or learning world, your L&D specialists or L&D team members would typically have a generic L&D program they would roll out for the team. They would say, hey, we are a resource to help you upskill. So if you're a people leader in this jet manufacturer, we have a few courses for you. If you want to learn about the latest Python scripts, we have a few courses for you, right? Or we're going to go buy that off the shelf from Udemy or Pluralsight. And so that would traditionally be all they would be responsible for. And they kind of turn a blind eye to all these other needs. But when you dig into let's say if it's a larger company, you probably dig into each department and notice that they have many L&D teams within those departments. So for example, the support team, which has to answer customer questions, they have to be trained on, hey, what's the tone we share with customers? How do we respond to these? What are the specs that we have to respond with? Because we can't mess that up on a fighter jet. And so that team itself probably has its own mini L&D org within that department. And you can imagine that on the engineering side or the design side as well too for design manufacturing. And so what we're saying is the new trend in this world is the L&D buyer can create this learning center of excellence to bridge that divide into those departments and help them create great learning programs within those departments. And so that's where we're seeing L&D becoming the central force within a company. Again, dotted line into these departments, but if you work together, you could get the best outcomes for not just the departments, but for the company overall. And that's the trend we're trying to push of companies of any size right now.
That's really interesting. So if I understand it, just to say it back to you, the sort of L&D specialism is to provide the I suppose almost the skill of creating really great L&D, and they enable the functions to be able to create those training, that training within, because they're going to be the ones that actually understand what's happening on a.
Totally. I'll give you a really tangible example. This customer I was talking about yesterday, she was walking through this workflow. It's such a cool workflow. So if a department within their company, they're about, I think, 5,000 to 6,000 people. If a department wants to come build that mini training program that's specific to that department, they go onto ServiceNow, they open up a ticket and they say, hey, I want to create a mini training program. They have a whole workflow that unlocks essentially a set of materials for that department to say, okay, you want to start a mini L&D function? Here's a list of resources. Here's a few videos. Here's how you get started. Then they give them access to the system. Again, you're democratizing the learning all the way out to the edges of an organization, where that provides truly the most impact are those edges of the organizations. And they have a whole workflow to enable the edges of the organization to get even better from an L&D perspective.
That is so cool. I love that. I love that. And I'm really glad you gave that tangible example, because I think one of the things that, I struggle with, and I know a lot of my listeners struggle with, is that there's so much on our plate right now that you have to be a specialist in everything. And sometimes it's sort of, it's easy to get the theory. It's hard to get those sort of tangible examples of like, what does this actually mean for us? That's awesome. Sorry. Yes. I interrupted you with the stupid questions before moving on to the other sort of big trend that you're seeing.
No, that first trend is not as sexy. It's more, hey, what's happening from a macro perspective of the dynamics within organizations, and obviously we're trying to help from a software perspective. And the second one is the AIification. I think I just made up that word. The AIification of the entire L&D category. If you think about, someone gave this great analogy on a podcast the other day, where software and cloud really just disrupted IT spend, whereas AI right now has the ability to disrupt your entire payroll, which is basically the majority of the spend of your company. And so the upside potential of AI is it's not just a cost savings benefit of moving to the cloud, but it has the ability to go touch every single individual on your payroll to make them more productive, to make them more impactful within organizations. And so it's important for all vendors, whether you're software or not, to leverage AI to say, hey, how can I transform what you're doing in your role? And so to get into more specifics, in the L&D function, there's a few critical areas that we're already seeing our customers navigate to, and whether they use WorkRamp or not, these are the big trends we're seeing. The first big one for L&D professionals is all around content creation. L&D professionals spend a lot of time doing instructional design or farming that out as well, because you have to create great content for your learners or for your constituents to actually want to consume that. It's like when you go on TikTok, you have to go consume interesting videos to stay engaged. That's one of your sole jobs, or one of your primary jobs as an L&D professional. And so we're seeing AI really impact how do you go create great content. And so, for example, with WorkRamp, we have a product called AI Assist, which is essentially AI assistant that helps you create that good content, imagery, questions, text generation, transcripts. Just make it so you can go on so you could go on overdrive when you're creating that content itself. So that's kind of one big piece in the L&D realm. Another big piece I like to say, and there's probably 5 or 6 big pieces, but another big one I'm really excited around is really around coaching. And so when you think about the edges of the network, when you think about departments getting trained, when you think about all these different departments, there's a really big element of AI-driven coaching when it comes to L&D. I'll give a really great example. We're about to partner with a company to provide this functionality, but what it does is you could do essentially certifications where you're talking to a trained bot that is very realistic. So for example, if you're making a cold call, this bot can be rude to you. It could be like, what do you want? Why are you calling me? Do you know what time it is? And act like a customer. But that's a great example of how do I coach you in real time of a real life scenario when you're making a cold call out to a sample prospect, and get that coaching in real time. And afterwards, it will say, hey, you used too many filler words. You sounded too afraid in your intro, or you weren't clear enough in your value prop statement. So it's a great example where AI can infuse coaching, whereas historically you needed a physical body present as a manager to come coach. Now you can offload that to AI that's trained on your company vernacular and on your company mission statement, so they can actually coach correctly.
That's very cool. That's very, very cool. And how much of the job today of an L&D professional or an L&D software provider like yourselves is creating their own training, and how much of it is curation of the I don't know, billions of training videos that exist out there in the world?
You know, it's really interesting. You know, there's a big market for off-the-shelf content that's curated. Think of the biggest players are Udemy, LinkedIn Learning, Coursera in the corporate environment, and we license from one of our partners, Go One, which is essentially an aggregator of learning content. They have about 85,000 courses. It's a big market. But what's interesting is when you look into a corporate environment and you think about all the learning that's going on the job, like in terms of what's proprietary to your organization, I would say it's about an 80-20 split in your day job. In your day job, if you think about it, what makes your company unique is not the off-the-shelf Python course, like I mentioned earlier, or the off-the-shelf training on how to use AI. What's really important is what is proprietary to my business processes and my business knowledge that I need to get trained up on to go service clients. So for example, if you're a consultant from McKinsey, you have very proprietary methodologies, not off-the-shelf methodologies that you're leveraging with clients. And that's why you can charge a premium on your hourly rate. And so we like to call it the 80-20 rule, where it's like 80% of your content is homegrown content that you want to go train people on. And we give customers the tools to be able to do that. Then the other 20% is still important. That is really when you think about how do we upskill our employees with the general skills they need to get to that next level. So great example is Pluralsight did a great job of this on the market is, hey, how do I get the baseline of my engineers higher? So for example, get them, if you're a Ruby on Rails shop, how do I get them ramped up on Ruby on Rails so they can write better code when they're in the environment? That's a great example of off-the-shelf content to up-level those skills. But I do think a comprehensive L&D program needs the best of both worlds. Really great proprietary skill building, which I talked about first, and then I call it universal skill building, which are the Pluralsights, Udemy's, and LinkedIn's of the world. And combined, they create a great end-to-end L&D program for companies.
Smart. Very smart. Into that 80%. Because I always think when people make a hire, I think businesses, I guess there are a couple of things. There's, can you do the job, right? Do you have the skills to do the job? And then I think there's this other piece, which I think is what you're saying, which is, how do you do the job here? And I guess that's the harder stuff. These are our methodologies. But have any of your clients done any work on the sort of the nuances of, I guess, how we deliver? You know, this is how you treat a customer. This is how you run a meeting. This is how you do. Actually, as I said that, I'm pretty sure we do that sort of training. I do think that maybe some of that stuff, because I'll say why I'm asking the question before I let you answer it. I feel like that's some of the stuff that's got lost in working remote, especially if you're completely remote. That kind of touch and feel, soaking it in from the person sitting next to you, joining them in a physical meeting, that sort of stuff. I wonder if you've seen companies doing that piece really well.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. So what I see in our customer base is you want to have a good base of skills that either someone inherently has. Usually when you're a manager and above and you're hired in, you kind of have that core base, but a lot of our clients will be hiring new grads and they might not know standard business practices. And so that's where that off-the-shelf content comes into play. Like, hey, let me get you an off-the-shelf leadership development 101 quick course for you to go ramp up on, because I don't want to recreate that as an L&D professional. That's not my specialty. So think about that as that base layer. Even in that model, the 80-20 model, that's like that 20% that everyone should have. But when you think about that 80%, the companies that care a lot about their culture, think about opinionated cultural companies in terms of, companies are opinionated about their culture like Netflix. It's like, hey, at Netflix, we care a lot about giving candid feedback. And that's not natural for a lot of companies. I remember my wife, she worked at a Big Four, and we give candid feedback here at WorkRamp. She was overhearing one of my calls during the work from home era. And she was like, oh my gosh, Ted, why were you being so mean to that employee? Like, that was so rude. And I was like, well, no, like culturally, we just do that. And you got to think about, hey, culturally, how do we instill those values? That 80% should be homegrown, written content that says, hey, we like things done this way. I was just talking to another colleague. This kind of blew my mind, is culturally at this company, they don't allow you to go on mute when you're on video calls. They're a fully remote company, but you are not allowed to go on mute. And I was like, that's strange. Like, to me, that would be super strange. But if you think about their culture, the reason being is the CEO wants everyone attentive and in a space that they can work. And it's part of their culture that you can't turn off your microphone, because they want it to be like you're in the room with them. But it's a great example is you're never going to get that off-the-shelf content from an off-the-shelf piece of content. You need to instill that cultural element into your trainings. And that's proprietary to your company, and we help you distribute and get everyone aligned with that culture. But you need to explain, like, what's the why? Someone might just think that's just a totalitarian leader that has a big ego, but I doubt that's the case. He has a reason for why he wants to drive a culture like that, and you could leverage your L&D team members to help drive that culture internally.
I mean, it might also be the totalitarian leader. Who knows? Who knows?
That too. I haven't met him. Haven't met him yet. But
I know you always think the best
unique.
of
I was like,
people,
that's crazy. Yeah.
Look, I think this is all super interesting. What does it mean for HR leaders in general when they're thinking about these two mega trends? They're thinking about how to how to build out their L&D to support the business in as strategic a way as possible. And look, people functions as well as I do. They've got a tight budget. How should they be? What are the steps that they should be taking, in your opinion, to really make the most of it?
It's a great question. I remember I was having a chat with one of our board members, Jack Altman, the former founder of and CEO of Lattice, and he was always a mentor that I looked up to, and it's great that he joined the board. And one of the trends awesome. That he saw early on. Yeah, it was a great, like, he was instilling so much wisdom. And what was really great was he was saying how the role of the CHRO is looking more and more like the role of the COO, obviously with some slight bends to it. And he felt that in this new era of efficiency, post-ZIRP era, zero interest rate policy era, is that the CHRO was going to be really on the hook for driving business performance through many different means. And so I was at HR Transform back in April, and this is a big topic we talked about during Transform is, hey, everyone who is a CHRO needs to know how they impact the business. They need to be financially literate. They need to be the right hand of the CEO to drive business performance, because that business performance comes through your people. If you think about even Workday's product offerings, there's two parts. There's HCM and there's financials. And those two combined essentially are your two biggest levers in your organization to drive business performance. Now, there's a long-winded way to get to your question. Is for one key pillar of the CPO, Chief People Officer, or CHRO, should be your learning and development pillar. Obviously, you have a few other pillars like comp, benefits, talent, et cetera, and recruitment. But when you think about this pillar that we're talking about for this conversation, this is one of the best pillars to drive business performance. When you think about Andy Grove saying, hey, what's the highest leverage activity that I can do as a manager to drive business performance? It's literally enabling your team through training, because with 1 hour of time to a group of 30 individuals, let's say if you're an executive, you can impart 30 hours of wisdom within 1 hour spent, right? And so it really does multiply and it allows you to scale exponentially if you put the time into it. And so my main piece of advice to people leaders is think about how do you drive business performance. And one of the key pillars to driving business performance is what we talked about at the top of the call, is how do you build these learning centers of excellence to drive that business performance even to the edges of the network within your organization. And if you can take that reporting and bring that right back to your CEO and say, hey, this is what I've impacted through my L&D programs. And so that's the recommendation I would give in this current environment.
That's fantastic. And, if you don't mind me adding my recruiting perspective onto what you said there, I'm definitely seeing a trend towards businesses putting more focus on developing their own talent to fill senior roles so that they can bring in junior talent into the organization, and so that they can create long-term career pathing for their employees. And I think with a little bit of thought around succession and around, a little bit of org design for what the business is going to look like when it grows, actually HR leaders can unlock a huge amount of value in their existing workforce through L&D. And we always say to our clients, you can solve any talent problem, any talent bottleneck in 3 years. It's when you let it get to 3 months that it can become a problem, right? So in 3 years, you can train someone in your organization. You can train a great leader to code, and they can be a great coding leader. You can train a great coder to become a leader. They can become a great coding leader. right? You can't do it. You can't do any of that in 3 months. So you have to go out to market. You have to pay a fortune to hire someone in. And to our conversation we were having earlier, they might not learn how our business does this particular thing. It might take 6 months, it might take a year, it might never happen. So I think there's this really interesting exercise that we love to do with our clients, but that any business can do really, which is just spending a little bit of time thinking, what's this business going to look like in 3 years' time if we hit all of our targets? Which pieces of this do we have internally already? Which pieces do we not? And what kind of interventions can we put in place, particularly from an L&D perspective, to really impact those outcomes? I think that's a cool lens as well.
And you know this probably better than me, is, when you interview, to your point, is you want to look for the capacity to learn and take feedback. It's kind of funny. We do this thing where, like if we ever do 2-on-1 interviews, we'll on the side say, hey, you're a good cop, I'm bad cop, and give them negative feedback, even if it's a great presentation or interview. One of us will give negative feedback and see if they could adapt and learn to that on the spot. But Felix, you're totally right. Is like, you want to make sure that the talent you're bringing in is not so rigid that they can't learn new things and they can't accept feedback, because that's the beginning of learning new things. And so it's critical to make sure the talent you bring in is open-minded that way. And you can't test for that, I think, in interviews. I've had people where we do that exercise and they just turn super defensive if they don't like what they hear. And right away we know, hey, those are people that might not have a strong capacity for learning and feedback.
We often do something similar. We'll give someone feedback after an early round of interview and see if they adjust for the next day.
Yeah.
So you give them time for that to. Anyway, good thinking, Ted. Ted, we have run out of time. I can't believe it. This has absolutely flown. I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining the podcast today. And really, really interesting conversation. I'm sure my audience will have got a load of value from it. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, Felix, thanks for having me. Thanks for all that you do at Instant Impact, and keep changing the world.
Hey, you too, man. I'll catch you later.